Hey now, all you sinners, put your lights on, put your lights on. Hey now, all you lovers, put your lights on, put your lights on. Hey now, all you killers, put your lights on, put your lights on. Hey now, all you children, leave your lights on. Better leave your lights on, 'cause there's a monster living under my bed, whispering in my ear.
2014 election season, I wrote and executed on the campaign plan. That plan involved getting multiple candidates on the ballot, and indeed, I recruited and successfully placed an additional 10 candidates on the ballot with Libertarian after the name. Together, we represent the largest third party running for office this fall, and the largest group of libertarians since 1982.
So let your light shine deep into my home. God, don't let me lose my nerve. Don't let me lose my nerve. And then there's a big solo, and I'm not ready to do the solo. But I am ready to tell the story about 2014 and an unusual run for office. Because, you know, I had no illusions I was going to win, but it was fun. Paul and I went down and we did a meeting and set up a press conference. And in my plan, one of the things we needed was better visibility. You know, if you show up, the press will do something. And that ended up being very true. And so we held a press conference with our top candidates at the state capitol, announcing the kickoff of the election. And believe it or not, the press actually came, including a couple of guys from a radio show called The Devil's Advocate. And I do a couple of interviews with The Devil's Advocate during the election. And so it was clearly the right thing to do. We haven't done it since, but it was a start. And the next thing that struck us was that after we had gathered the signatures, we planned to do a petition scrub. You go make sure that all the information that's in there is correct and full, because if you're missing just one digit on a zip code, the signature doesn't count. And so we set up to meet at the IHOP in Madison the day that you had to turn these things in. And I believe, if I recall correctly, we had like 13 either candidates or helpers come go scrub those, including Mary Jo, who was the lieutenant governor candidate for the Democrats in the primary. She didn't win, but she showed up to help us out. And another guy by the name of, oh my gosh, it was Jeremy, I believe, came down. And he had run as a Democrat against, whoever was in the second district. In any case, he made a big stink about it. But, we had a couple of Democrats come help us fill out our paperwork. And oddly enough, we had a guy from the Associated Press show up at the IHOP to cover our petition drive. And I'm still not sure how we knew that was going to happen. But it was very cool. The story actually was written, and it was picked up in a number of papers around America, including the Sacramento or the San Diego, one of the papers. I mean, it was picked up nationally, which was really kind of interesting. And so it was quite the kickoff. Quite the kickoff. Now, I have to preface the story by saying that in March of that year, my family and I had gone out to Colorado to visit family, my birth family, in Colorado Springs for a family reunion. And so I was there in March, right after Prohibition had ended in Colorado. You could now smoke recreationally as openly as you wanted. It's quite amazing. And so I stopped at a place called the Lazy Lion in Colorado Springs with my sister. And the Lazy Lion was a club that opened up on the 1st of January that opened up on January 1st in Colorado. And by March, when I was there for spring break, which is right about this time 9 years ago. They said that by that point they had 30,000 members. It was $5 to join for a day, $30 to join for a month. And inside was this incredible bar-like setup, but for marijuana. There were also rooms set aside that you could rent or maybe sign up for, and you could bring in TVs and video games and spend the night getting stoned with your friends and hang out and smoke all the weed you wanted. It was a great deal. But one of the cool things, really cool things, was that in the bar area, they had a dab bar. And in fact, they claimed to have America's first dab bar. And so, since Colorado was the first one to have full recreational, and this was one of the first clubs opened, it's pretty safe to say that that was the first dab bar in America. And I got to dab at the first dab bar in America. So another first. It was an amazing time. From there, we went straight north up to Mount Rushmore and the other scenery up there. But I stopped at Rushmore in particular because, as a joke, I had my daughter take this picture of me, which I then posted on Facebook. And it was truly just a joke. But in a minute, you'll see how oddly funny that joke really was. You know, there's lots of things I could talk about in terms of the campaign itself, and I don't need to really, cover it day by day. But a couple things to talk about were the candidate forums that I did. One in particular I did up in Rock County here in Wisconsin, and there were about 20 candidates from different offices, local, state. And, what was prevalent in people who would come and see me afterwards and say thank you for coming and had a conversation about, some of my thoughts on matters. One was very endemic of the whole conversation, which was the chair of the Rock County Democrats came up and thanked me for my position on a number of issues, including the freedom issues. And she said, and this is so echoed over and over, Bob, I think I agree with about 95% of what you say, but I got to vote for the blue team or the red team's going to win. And so when I go to the Catholic high school a few months later in Madison, where I'd been invited to speak as a candidate, I had the opposite. Bob, it's the first time I'm going to vote, but I agree with 95% of what you say. You just need to know I'm going to vote for the red team or the blue team's going to win. Some folks came up next to me and said, hey, thanks so much for, your position on marijuana legalization and on ending the wars and on what it would mean to have a free and open society. In fact, the presentation I gave at the high school was probably one of the most fulfilling in terms of hope, because there were really bright young men and women looking for new ideas, open to things. One young lady came up afterwards. She says, I think I agree with 95% of what you're saying, Bob. I can't agree with this one issue. And I said, well, let me explain the issue a little bit better like this. Look, you regulate restaurants and tell them that they can't discriminate. And the thing is, they still discriminate. You just give them the confines within which they should try and not discriminate and be obvious about it. I said, you want to regulate them. I want you to know who they are, and you can put them out of business. And the young lady looks at me and she goes, oh my God, I think you're right. I never thought of it like that. Yeah, we could have done a whole lot of things to make our economy better. And the coffee shop in Walworths was a great first example of exposing systemic racism and standing up against it. And it was actually a highly juxtaposed moment to speaking at the Senior Center a few weeks earlier, where about 10 minutes into my presentation, not a few weeks earlier, it was earlier that day or the day before, it was the day before, where a number of the seniors literally got up and walked out of the room. Didn't want to hear anything I was going to say because there was the hot button issue of whatever it was that triggered him. And, you know, what's come around as I ran the election is that I began to see broadly the political spectrum of ideology. And it wasn't one of, I believe in this, as much as it was, I fear that. And as hard as people try to be informed, I became more and more aware of the manipulation in the news media, in particular since I was ignored for the debates. And so one thing that I did was I got invited to do a video piece that was going to go on Wisconsin Public Television, and it's on their website. I'll toss it in here real quick.
Scott Walker and Mary Burke aren't leaders. They're part of a machine that has driven our state and our country into the ground, and it has divided us from our neighbors with smear campaigns and petty squabbles. If you want leadership and to hear what someone with a different set of priorities would do for Wisconsin, tell Wisconsin Public Television to include me in the October 16th forum, which currently will only feature the Democrat Mary Burke. The people of Wisconsin deserve, and from my conversations desire, to hear my ideas side by side with the other candidates on the public stage. To that end, I have also been excluded from the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association televised debates on October 10th and 17th.
And so, yeah, I looked straight into the camera and I told the Wisconsin Public Television folks, you know, you should put me on the debate stage. And I deserve to be on the debate stage. And no one else had really done that in a video like that. A few weeks later, I was doing a radio interview with Wisconsin Public Radio, Joey Cardine, I believe. And I was sitting outside the studio. I was going to go remote. She was in Madison. I was in Eau Claire. And the studio manager came up, introduced himself. We chatted for a moment. And I asked him, I said, hey, there was supposed to be an event at Stevens Point that was hosted by you guys. What happened to that? And he did. He looked a little flummoxed for a moment, like he knew something that he should have said, but didn't. But that's another interesting story because we had filed a complaint for being excluded from the debates. And in that complaint, Andy, who had written it, specifically said, if you are going to decline the right of the candidate to be in the debate, you have to elucidate why you justify that. And so for the first time, we actually got the state of Wisconsin to define a debate, which had to be between at least two candidates. Didn't have to be any more, but at least two. And when the debates were announced for the governorship, they announced 3 debates, of which Scott Walker would only participate in 2 of them. The third one was supposed to be held at Stevens Point at the university, at UW Stevens Point. There was a story about this in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. And I don't know if it was after I did my video or they made it before, but Wisconsin's public stations had determined that since Scott Walker didn't want to do it, they would just do it as a local forum, and it was just going to be Mary Burke. With the new ruling, I planned to just show up because they couldn't just do it with Mary Burke there, according to the new rule by the Government Accountability Board. They ended up canceling the event, and so I went back and I was just tootling around. I checked out the story that was written in the Milwaukee Journal about the debates, and they scrubbed any mention that there had ever been a plan for a third debate, that they canceled it, or why. So be it. I didn't have a whole lot of outside activity because I ran a donationless campaign. So you weren't going to find me putting a bunch of posters up, a bunch of signs up. I wasn't traveling all over the state every day and every week, but I ran a donationless campaign, and I think I talked about this in the last video, because I never wanted anyone to ever walk up to me and say, I regretted giving you money because you didn't say what I wanted you to say, or I said something unpopular. I say all sorts of things that are unpopular. It's just what Stinky does. But it also, I think, created a well of hope, of faith, of love, whatever you want to call it. Because the Friday before the election, I came back to my office from being out, and I had a phone call from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. And it was a reporter from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel saying, "Hey, Mr. Burke, there are a set of ads being released on YouTube on your behalf for marijuana legalization, and I want to get your comments on it." I heard nothing about this whatsoever. But an organization called America's Future Fund, which was a Koch-funded organization, had decided to spend money on 2 elections in America where they were going to do something to support the libertarian. The first one was a gentleman down in the Carolinas by the name of Sean Howe. Sean ran a beautifully peaceful campaign. He's an utter sweetheart. I met him at the National Convention in 2018. And they made a set of ads up for him that was premised on the idea, as he ran for Senate, less war, more weed. He was anti-war, as every libertarian should be, and he was pro-legalization, as every libertarian should be. And so that was his. In his election, he actually spread 7 points. That is, he got 7% of the vote, and he did swing the election. In my election in Wisconsin, the Marquette University polling had never polled my name, not once. But what they had polled, which was Mary Burke and Scott Walker, had them polled for months at a time. 44, 45, 43, 44, 45, 46, 43, 42, really, really close. And so in Wisconsin, if there were any election they were hoping to swing, it was the gubernatorial election, where there was less than a 1.5% difference between the candidates. Now, what they did was they put together a set of pro-legalization ads. And the first one is called the Mount Rushmore of weed.
So, who do you think is on the Mount Rushmore of weed?
Definitely Snoop Dogg. Bob Marley?
Willie Nelson.
And Robert Burke, after he legalizes marijuana in Wisconsin.
Vote Robert Burke for governor. Get Burke. Get blazed. Mount Rushmore? More like Mount Cushmore.
Yeah, that weekend I had a choir concert for my daughter down in Madison. I'm leaving the concert on Sunday, driving home. My phone rings. There's a Democrat on the phone. He's quite angry. Why would you conspire to do this? And honestly, I said, I didn't have anything to do with this, but I support the free right of people to do anything they want. And this was really cool. There are actually 9 ads, and I'll put a couple more on my Facebook, or I'll throw them up here rather, on the channel. I wouldn't get more than 0.75% of the vote, because in Wisconsin, you had to vote for the red team, or the blue team was going to win. Or you had to vote for the blue team, or else the red team was going to win. And on that same weekend before the election, not only were my ads dropped, but Scott Walker's campaign dropped a bombshell on Mary Burke's work history and success in Europe, which they'd been touting. And I honestly can't believe they did it myself. But they did. It swayed the vote heavy to Scott Walker. But it didn't seem to affect me or the other candidate, Gus, that ran. Gus? That does that. My apologies. And so what really came out of the election were some big wins for the Libertarians. We had a head-to-head race of Wendy Froelich over in just outside of Milwaukee. She got 29% of the vote in a head-to-head race against the Democrat, which meant that a really good candidate in a head-to-head race could make a real difference. The real shocker, think about this, the real shocker was the Attorney General candidate that we had. And Tom was a sweetheart. And he did campaign some, but he didn't get out there and, shake a bunch of trees and do radio interviews that I could tell. He was just on the ballot. And just on the ballot for Attorney General. That's the person that gets to prosecute the Democrats and the Republicans, whose job it is to make sure that the local police aren't overstepping their bounds. And if I heard anything over and over and over again, one of the things that makes a libertarian is an experience with our law enforcement breaking their own laws. Tom got 4% of the vote statewide and was the top of the statewide vote getters, which spoke to me and said, hey, there's a vein here. And if we stick to that vein and we work and develop a really good candidate, we can really make a splash in an election. I learned a lot in that election, and it would all go to waste, as you'll see in the next video. So on the night of the election, I stopped over at the Democrats' party at the Hudson Hotel and chatted with them for a while. And then I met up a couple of friends over at the bowling alley on the other side of the highway, and we watched the results come in. And about, 10:30, 11, my buddy Joe and I conceded the election. It was tough. We were both heartbroken. But I'm going to close with our concession speech, because it really is totally true. Peace. So, Joe, it doesn't look like we're going to win.
So what are we going to do, Bob?
We're going to do the same thing we do every night, Joe. Plan to take over the world and leave people alone. All you children, leave your lights on. Better leave your lights on, 'cause there's a monster living under my bed, whispering